Guys, would you believe me if I told you that this roof on this home is not a real slate roof? This is a Davinci multi-width shingle that we're using, and I want to walk you through the entire installation process on this home. When we were designing this home, one of the things that was in the early renders was a wood roof. We looked at that from a cost perspective. It was at a time where cedar was really heightened in cost. So we started looking at alternatives and different products that we could bring to the table that were more architecturally pleasing than, say, a traditional asphalt roof. The roof is a really big component of this home. From the design perspective, we have all these swooping curved roofs. So we wanted something that was going to be really architecturally pleasing. We actually built a mock-up on site, had a handful of products shipped to us, and ultimately decided on the Davinci multi-width slate shingle. The nice part about it is that the multi-width is available in 6, 7, 9, 10, and 12-inch widths. So when you're installing it, you get that randomized pattern, which I believe gives it that authentic look. The authentic slate was something that we looked at. From a cost perspective, it didn't really make sense. There was considerations of the weight of traditional slate and whether or not that would trigger re-engineering the roof. Lastly, a lot of these roofs have curving features to them, which would be really difficult with a traditional slate versus using something like this that is a more plastic product, can curve along those roof lines. So ultimately, those are the things that led us to the decision of using the Davinci. Now that the roof is complete, it looks really nice. We had a few people stop by and look at it from the street and asked if it was slate, and we told them that no, it's a Davinci multi-width product, and they were surprised to learn that. We even gave them a couple samples because they were interested in the product themselves. So let's talk about the installation of this. First thing that we did once this roof was all framed was we actually covered the entire roof with a Grace Ice and Water Shield, which is made by GCP. It's not required by Davinci specs to cover the whole roof, but the reason why we covered that whole roof, we wanted a nice continuous self-adhered membrane. We knew that the team that was going to be installing this was going to be taking their time, remain unprotected for a period of time, and it allowed the interior to move into finishes prior to having the whole roof installed. So from a schedule perspective, it really helped. The benefits of using the Grace, it's available pretty much anywhere, box stores, our local lumber supplier. We're able to get it, so if we're in a bind and we run a roll short, we know we can go out and get another roll. But also just the overall durability, the product being tried and true, it's something that we're using constantly on our roof systems, whether it is the full roof or just the troublesome areas like the edges and valleys. But getting into the actual installation, so there's a couple things that we were going to run into from a technically difficult, specifically was our valleys. Some of these valleys are curving. One of the recommended installation methods is to have an open valley. We could have done an open valley with a exposed metal, but in order for us to do that would have required us to do a soldered copper valley. Why soldered is because, well, we have this curving valley and two pieces of metal can't really be bent that way or stretched or shrunken in that shape. It would have been a beautiful detail, but the amount of work that would have added to the roof would have been a substantial cost. So we worked with the team at Davinci and talked to them about doing a closed valley. Rather than having the valleys have a small gap with metal in between, we're talking about the shingles being butt up tight, which you can see on the roof where the shingles are tight to each other. It doesn't require us to have an architectural exposed metal in that valley. Instead, the way we accomplished the flashing detail was, number one, we have our Grace Ice and Water Shield across the whole roof. We're doubled up in the valley. In addition to that, we actually took rolled lead, which is a common roof flashing material, and we actually rolled it in the valley, and we're able to kind of pound it into place, essentially stretch that lead into the valley, and that essentially gave us our belt and suspenders approach to that valley being protected. From there, we were able to run our shingles tight to each other. Some of the things that we had to pay close attention to is the back of the shingles are webbed. So when you cut a shingle, you are going to have the risk of this having, or this webbing being exposed. Being that it's a closed valley, and when you do have that cut, it prevents you from seeing it. So if these were two cut shingles and this was your valley, you could actually butt them up against each other and you're not going to see that exposed webbing underneath. So that was really important. So outside the valley, we also are dealing with a drip edge detail that we needed to have custom made. So we actually worked with a local sheet metal manufacturer, and they were also able to make the curving drip edge. because we have that drip edge along the fascia, but that drip edge also continues up the rake. So as it comes down the rake, it actually has to be curved as well. So the sheet metal shop was able to make that for us. We looked at using a copper option. The gutters won't be copper, they will be a powder coated aluminum. So we actually were able to work with the manufacturer of the drip edge. They were able to use an aluminum product that would then be powder coated the same color as the gutter, but all of that had to be custom made. Copper would be a great option. You have a little bit more flexibility in the terms of not having to finish it. You could have those exposed valleys. Really beautiful product, but we're looking at the project holistically and realizing that that is adding a substantial amount of cost to it. How else can we achieve it? And one of the ways we were able to achieve it is by using rolled lead in the valleys and then aluminum on the drip edge. So once all of that drip edge and the valleys are all installed, then went back and actually taped those valleys and the drip edge back to the grease ice and water on the roof. So now we have a completely covered roof. All of the drip edge and the valleys are prepared for our shingle, and then we start with our Davinci multi-width slate. So they do offer a starter course, so that starter course is going to be the first shingle you put on, and that's going to be set right at your drip edge line. From there, we work our way up the roof and set it at the exposure that these shingles are rated for. A tip for that is if you're working up the roof and you have a long way to go, try to work that spacing all the way up to your ridge being the very point of your roof. So if you're able to adjust that exposure ever so slightly, you can do that in a way that allows you to get full courses all the way up. Same thing with end to end. You're able to run the shingles out and figure out how many shingles you need of what size to make sure that you're not ending up with having to cut that. You don't want to expose this on the very end. You want to use full shingles. We didn't actually have any cut shingles on the edge of the roof. So that's another benefit of having the different widths, the 12, the 10, 9, 7, and 6-inch widths, as you work your way across, you're able to kind of jump ahead and figure out what size shingle you need. What the manufacturer requires is a 3/8 gap between shingles. So if I'm holding them about 3/8 of an inch apart, you can adjust the spacing in between slightly if you need to, but essentially removing the need to cut any of these shingles at the very edge. Sometimes you'll see them run a full shingle on the edge, and then that first one in they might cut. We've effectively avoided that. The one area that you are going to get that cut is in the valley. One of the last pieces that we have is at the very top. We have our ridge cap. So our ridge cap is a single piece ridge cap. They do recommend on a steeper roof to use 2 pieces of shingle essentially to create your ridge cap. We did that and set that up on this roof, and we just weren't happy with the overall result. So we went back to Davinci and said, hey, can we use this on our roof? Some of it is a 17 pitch, and I know you guys have a maximum recommendation as to what pitch this can go on. And ultimately, we felt confident in our install that we could use this single piece. And they've actually cut the detail on the front there, and they've actually given you this pre-folded member. So if you look on the roof right now, some of it is slightly flared up. These are brand new. The team did go through and actually fold everything really tight to sit on the roof really tight, but ultimately we haven't had that much warm weather. As the warm weather does hit, that anything that is slightly flared up is going to essentially fall into place. Nice solid ridge cap on the very top all the way across the entire home. And so we have these 2 little flat roofs where the windows actually intercept the roof line, and that's in the homework loft as we're calling it. And we worked with the guys at True North to do a liquid applied membrane. You guys may have seen that video before. If not, we'll link it here. The key there was to make sure that when we transitioned from flat roof back to shingle, that we had a nice transition where water could not infiltrate behind these shingles. They did that by adhering that liquid membrane again to a rolled lead. It is important that you use gloves when you're using it. If you were to look at this small little roof here where it's swooping, you can see right where it transitions from shingle up behind the sidewall shingle. That is a strip of lead which goes up behind the wood shingle and then is taped to our WRB. We've actually left the exposure of that upper course to be the same or slightly smaller than the 7 inches by bringing that lead down to make sure that visually as you look up, all of that coursing looks the same. A couple other details I'd love to point out is that anytime our roof intercepts with our sidewall, So here's a great example. There's two roof lines that hit our sidewall. Behind that, you're gonna have our Grace Ice and Water that goes along the roof and then up our sidewall first. That's gonna tie into our WRB, which is our Sega product. And then on top of that, we're gonna use traditional step flashing. Something that oftentimes gets missed is what we call kick-out flashing. Kick-out flashing is that black flashing at the very end of that shingle. And what that is for is as water runs down that roof, it's gonna hit that black metal and then divert that water out away from the home. Now, eventually that will divert the water into a gutter. Right now, it's just kicking it off the home. That helps prevent premature failure of our cedar shingles. This is going to help create longevity that otherwise would be an area that would fail over time or see more staining than some of the other areas. So installation of kick-out flashing is hugely important when you're thinking about how the roof interacts with your sidewall. Another detail, if you look way up, we have these two chimneys, this being the main chimney in the center of the home. If you guys remember, that is framed wood chimney. There's a gas fireplace on the inside, and it's clad with a full brick. And as they roof, they actually intertwine that lead with the coursing of the shingles. Very traditional method, but I want to call attention to it because those are the areas that can be troublesome and create leaks long term. Now, just for the sake of this conversation, the two chimneys are not done yet. We actually do have our fireplace venting installed, but we're waiting on our sheet metal manufacturer to build the chimney caps, which will be the final detail on those chimneys. And they'll actually have some really cool copper hats on it. And I know I say copper, and earlier I said that there wasn't any copper detailing on it. That is the only copper that we see on the roof, with the exception of, if we look over here, this was a last minute change. Right now, that copper kind of sticks out, but over the course of the next few months, that's gonna brown out really nice, and that is our boiler exhaust. These are the things that you wanna pay attention to when you are installing the roof. You know, oftentimes, and myself included, we install a roof and then we have all these penetrations that we need to deal with later, and then we're poking through the roof and then pulling shingles back and patching it, or installing a flashing kit that doesn't require you to pull the shingles back. You really want to think about this stuff ahead of time. So before that section was roofed, we knew that the boiler exhaust was going to head up and out of that roof, so we made sure that that was installed prior to them shingling that area. Same thing with our plumbing venting. Up on this triple window dormer, we actually have our main 4-inch vent. So that was something that we needed to make sure it was installed prior to us roofing. So when you're thinking about, all right, I need to get the roofers on site, you want to make sure that you're getting your plumber on site beforehand. The team at Darb Mechanical did a great job. They were able to get everything up to the attic and tie to this main 4-inch vent, but they located it right in the middle of that dormer. And then you'll notice right adjacent to that is actually our kitchen exhaust. And that kitchen exhaust is going to be tied all the way back down into our kitchen hood. Again, locating everything here on the back of the home in an area that doesn't get a lot of eyeballs. And that's an important detail, maybe an elementary detail for a lot of you guys, but some of you guys that are just getting started or thinking about building, those are things that you want to think about ahead of time. What things are going to penetrate the side of my home? Venting, bathroom vent, laundry vent, kitchen vent, ERV vent, exhaust, intake, plumbing vents, boiler vents. All of that stuff is going to exit the home in some way, and for us, we try to consolidate all of that in one area or maybe two areas. And if it can't be consolidated, then we're thinking about how do we address this in a really architecturally pleasing way, so it's not just this big hood hanging off the side of the home. And now that it's all done, using the Davinci multi-width slate shingle, and you know, the homeowner, architect, designer, everyone can attest to, including the neighbors that stop and ask us questions on a pretty regular basis, I think it really is the icing on the cake here. Kudos to the team for pulling this off. Kudos to Boston Exterior for doing such a great install, really taking their time. They really showcased a lot of their craftsmanship during the installation of this roof, took their time to make sure it was done in a way that hit all those details from performance perspective and of course the aesthetic perspective. We have some paint left to do, of course the landscape as the interior progresses along, but seeing this roof complete is really the icing on the cake. And then once this home is 100%, it'll be nice to see what this roof lends itself to the overall aesthetic of this beautiful home.